Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's Rails online program, Census 2020. We are going to get started in a second here, but for right now, I'm just going to give people just another minute or so to come in. In the meantime, you should be able to see a chat box if you below, and I'm just going to type a message in there, and that will come in handy later when we move to the chat portion of our webinar, and we'll be communicating that way, so there actually won't be any audio during that portion. But I'll type a message in there if you want to just say hi or put in your name. I would appreciate that, just to kind of find out who you are and where you're coming from. Thanks. Great. Okay, looks like you've all found it. That's fantastic. Seeing some names come in. I really appreciate that. Okay, so it's almost 1 o'clock, and we're going to get started. I just want to welcome you to today's online roundtable. Again, my name is Dan Bostrom. I'm the Rails Member Engagement Manager. This is our third Rails online roundtable, and I'm really excited. We have a very exciting topic. If you didn't attend the first two, you might be confused a little bit about what we're doing here today. So we have Rails has a fantastic network of people and libraries doing amazing things. And we like to get together, in person and sometimes online to kind of talk about these things. So that's why we're here today. We want to harness the energy that's going into our member libraries and all the ideas that are out there. And we want to make it convenient for everyone in Rails. So that's why I'm really excited to be joined by colleagues Ashley Johnson and Catherine Savage from the Vernon Area Public Library. And I'm going to be turning it over to them in a second. But first, I just want to kind of go over a little bit about what's going to be happening today. Here we go. There's our agenda. So I'm going to do a quick introduction about some things happening around Rails, and then Ashley and Catherine are going to do a short presentation. And then the second half is going to be a text discussion. And that's going to be a chance for you to weigh in with your ideas, with your obstacles, with your challenges, and with your opportunities. Ashley and Catherine are also going to be leading you in a little bit of an exercise to help sort of plan this stuff out. So we're excited about this. So I'll be putting prompt questions into the chat box. So please do locate it. If you can't find it, maybe just raise your hand, and I'll try to get to you. So we're experimenting with this format a little bit. So please just be patient with us, and we'll try to get to it as much as we can. At the very end, I'll come back, and then we'll do a wrap up and conclusion. Okay, just some Rails news and opportunities for you, things that you can take advantage of from Rails. So we have this great CE event that's coming up next week. That's on Monday. It's called Cleaning Your Data with OpenRefine. This is part of our series on data. This is a workshop that's happening at the Rails Burr Ridge Service Center. It's presented by Margaret Heller, who's the Digital Services Librarian at Loyola University in Chicago. And this is just another one of events that, again, is dealing with data, but also in connection to our My Library Is campaign, which I'll mention right now. So the My Library Is campaign is our efforts to help libraries tell their story and articulate their value to stakeholders like board members, community leaders, the public, students, administrators, principals, everyone who might be in the role of a funder or just the role of potential advocate for libraries. So as part of this campaign, we've put together a new website, mylibraryis.org. We're collecting things like press releases, videos, social media, everything. And we're also going to be offering some continuing education, as I mentioned, that data webinar or that data workshop that is coming up next week. So we're really excited. And also, if you want to submit stuff, you can do that straight through that mylibraryis.org website. It would really help us build a more rich and vibrant collection of materials. Speaking of rich and vibrant, BiblioBoard is our free ebook app. It's also available online at library.biblioboard.com. Anyone who's physically located in the state of Illinois has access to BiblioBoard. All you need is Wi-Fi and a device, and it allows for unlimited synchronous usage. So it's a really nice app, a really nice resource for your community. We're really excited about some of the new collections. We have a great open educational resources for libraries. That's great for college students or teachers or high school students who are looking for, things that they can put into a research paper or potentially just for learning for itself. So we actually put together a Facebook campaign to kind of promote titles in there. So please do check out our Facebook page. We also have some new collections, including graphic novels, and then some indie author works in there, which are really exciting. Explore More Illinois is our museum and cultural attraction app, and this is free for any library to use. We just launched back in April, and we're really excited about it. Over 100 libraries are currently participating. I was looking for new cultural organizations to join. So if you have any suggestions on dance groups or theater companies or museums or historical societies or anything like that you think would benefit from this program, we'd love to hear about them, especially in your area. So the only thing that you need to do is just promote the opportunity and promote Explore More for Rails and for other libraries. So you're here because this is a Census 2020 roundtable, and if you're interested in more, we have a great Census 2020 resource page on the Rails website. So this includes links to like our email list. We have a Census 2020 email list. We have recording from a live event that happened at Burr Ridge back 2 weeks ago. We have recording to a member update in which Joe Natali from the Illinois State Library talked about the census. And we also have links to a lot of other resources. So please do check that out. Go to the Rails website and you should be able to find it. And then I want to mention that if you like today's presentation, that you can do it all again in 2 weeks. So on Thursday, August 15th from 10 to 11 a.m., we have another one, and this one, it's going to be on Census 2020 services and resources. You can find this in L2. You can sign up for it there. We're really excited about this. Catherine and Ashley are going to be joining me again, which is fantastic. And I'm very pleased to be able to offer 2 of these, not just one, because these are definitely different topics. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Catherine and Ashley. Ashley Johnson is the Business Outreach Librarian at the Vernon Area Public Library, and Catherine Savage is the I'm sorry, Catherine, that's the wrong title for you. You're the head of Integrated Communications at the Vernon Area Library. Is that right?
Yep, I don't know.
I was muted, sorry. Hi. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'm turning it over to you. Thanks again for joining us.
All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Johnson, and as Dan just mentioned, I'm the Business Outreach Librarian at the Vernon Area Library.
And I'm Catherine Savage. I'm the Head of Communications at the Vernon Area Library.
And for those of you who just jumped on the census topic recently, you probably realize that there's a lot for libraries to do and not a ton of time to do it. So it's a little overwhelming. So we thought we'd start with something that you can absolutely get your head around and get moving right now, and that is library programming. This is a good way to get things started, and it feels like an immediate victory to you. The first part of the session, we're going to talk about library programming as it relates to the 2020 census. Who is the audience, and what do you need to deliver to that audience? For the second half, we're going to get started with a worksheet for you to start cross-matching audiences with program goals. And we'll do some group brainstorming for program ideas to get that filled in. And by the end of the day today, you will have at least a framework to flesh out for strategic decision-making about census programming at your library. If we can manage, you'll also leave with some concrete ideas for specific programs to plan for this winter and spring that will help you support a complete and correct census count in your community.
So because we're talking about programming, a lot of this is going to center around newsletter cycles. And here at Vernon, we've got a 3-month newsletter cycle. Are most of you folks on a quarterly newsletter production cycle, or is there anyone on a 2-month cycle? I think Northbrook does 2. Anybody do 4? Because this really, if you do 4 months at a time, you're going to really need to jump on this. So for us, we just put our fall newsletter to bed, and so that means our programs that go through November are in print and on their way to patrons this next week. So the earliest opportunity we have to start inserting census programming into our calendar is December. And let me just say, December is absolutely not too early to start banging the drum about the census is coming and it's important and you're gonna need to do something about it. So you're probably all thinking, you know, well, I know how to book programming. I'm a librarian who books programming. Why do I need a whole webinar about this? And I'm going to talk about how we're going to use programming in a slightly different way than we typically do. Because the census outcome is so important, so much rides on there being a complete and correct count. We want to make sure everyone is getting the most bang out of their programming buck. So we're going to invest some time right now to make really strategic choices about the kinds of programs and events we're going to offer. Your library's census campaign is ultimately going to involve other tools. This doesn't all ride on your programming, but we want to employ every tool we have in our arsenal to this cause. So we'll eventually loop in community partners and advertising, social media, but today we're going to talk about using programming to get people to fill out their census form. So we're not just talking about taking in a programming or attending an event. We have this other outcome in mind. So 2 areas that we're going to think about today when pinpointing the kinds of programs that are going to best serve your community is who is that audience and what is the message that they need to hear. So people who are already planning to fill out their census form are not really the people we need to reach to encourage to fill out their census form. So we're going to be taking a look at some tools that will help us specifically point out who's not likely to fill in their census form. Those are the people we really need to talk to. Folks, those are called hard to count populations, HTC. And as we move forward with census planning, you're going to hear that, that phrase a lot. They are the audience for your programming. And what do those HTC folks need in order to move from not knowing about the census to filling out their actual form? And for that, we're going to apply a sales model from marketing, because in a lot of ways, this is more about closing a deal than it is about just having participants at a program. So we're going to put a pin in that for a second, and we're going to start with talking about the hard to count audiences. Ashley.
Yes. So this is the big question of the day. How do I identify the hard to count folks in my community? Fortunately, that's the whole deal with the census. They've got all sorts of data. So we can know the response rate for each census block from the last census. This gives us a very concrete measure of success for 2020. So your goal is to beat the number from 2010. And if you are at a library where they, love their return on investment and they're really kind of crunching the numbers when it comes to time, this is a great thing to be able to share with your library and with other stakeholders that you're going to be working with. We can identify the socio-demographic groups that historically have a low response rate through some of these tools, and we can know where those folks live, which hard to count groups your library serves and where. There are several hard to count map tools available. The one that we're looking at here on this slide is from CUNY. It's the HTC 2020 map tool. And we're going to share a link to that in the chat here. It's Census Hard to Count Maps 2020.us. And then this is an additional map that we love. This is from the Census Bureau itself, and that's the Rome map. Like the other map, you can zoom into the census block to see the info, and it has information on, the poverty level, health insurance, how many people under which age are where. You can look up your area on this map, click through your census blocks, and it'll give you info on each, including what the response rate was in 2010 and what's expected to be in 2020, and expected stats on the hard-to-count communities in that block. So every community will have a different mix of these HTC populations, and your library might not, most definitely will have multiple census tracts. So what I tend to do is just kind of take an average between and try to identify the highest percentage of hard to counts. But we'll get that. To get the maximum value out of the activities you pursue to turn out the count, you're going to need to understand who in your community needs the nudge. So your homework, because there's too much to dig into right here, right now, is look at these maps and gather the info for your specific area. It's a really good investment of your time, and what you learn there will be the basis of so much of the planning that you're going to be doing over the next, hopefully, few months. So again, those URLs are Census Hard to Count Maps 2020.us and the census.gov/Rome.
So that's going to be a fairly hefty homework chunk, but like Ashley said, it's worth your time to understand this so that you're not wasting any effort here. So once you've identified who your audiences are, who it is you need to talk to, you need to take them sort of through a sales process to get them to fill out their form. It's different from most programming where we're often looking just for participation and we're not necessarily driving a specific action. In this case, we're going to use programming as a marketing tool. So to give some form to that, I'm going to point you at a model for marketing, and it's the sales process. It's the steps that it takes to go from zero to closing a deal, from noticing that a product exists to purchasing it. In that case, that final action is them filling out their census form. So they first need to know that the census is happening, and then they need to understand that it's important and what it is that they need to do. Then they need to believe that they should participate. And this is the emotional response piece of this picture. And they need to take action to fill out their form. So if you do have some experience with marketing, you may recognize this formula as ACA, awareness, comprehension, conviction, and action. It's also sometimes framed as AIDA, awareness, interest, desire, and action. If you've seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, you might recognize this as the thing on the bulletin board that coffee is for closers. You got to always be closing. These are the steps to always be closing. So, so the first step is know, and you can do that just by having anything at all as an activity. Having a program in your newsletter or on your calendar or advertised in the library is going to call attention to the fact that the census is taking place. And it's a really important first step. People who don't know aren't going to participate. Then they need to understand what it means to them. What do I need to do? Why do I need to do it? What does this mean for me and my family? So anything you can do to get them to engage with the idea of the census, even just for a little bit, will help move that along. And some examples of programs that might help a person understand would be like the history of the census, or an informational session from a congressional representative or a representative from the census about what to expect. You could do anything to demonstrate how the data is used for decision making by the government, or you could show how the data can be used for your business or organization. So I myself am giving a presentation in October at Indian Trails Library about using census data. So if you're a business librarian, this is really your chance to shine. So understand. Programs built around the belief piece of the sales process, you're going to want to aim to build desire there for them to be part of the census. So this is, you're looking for an emotional response. And this might be the most nebulous piece of this puzzle, but some of the ways you can address that are framing participation in the census as a patriotic act or as a virtuous act. You're helping your community by participating in the census. You can speak to people's self-interest. What is it in their world that the census affects? And so if you have kids in school, a lot of school policies and decisions and funding is based on census. You can try to leverage social norms. Like everyone is doing it. We all know that like when you go to vote, you get a sticker that says, hey, I voted. This is the piece of that puzzle that it's looking to multiply. Like if everyone else is doing it, I feel like I should do it too. That's a really strong influencer. And you can take the sales tactic of like, this is a really limited opportunity. It's time sensitive. You have to act now. So anything that you're doing around the census, you might mention like, hey, go home and fill out your form today. And then that is that final piece, encouraging people to take action. So could you plan an event or a program where people are literally filling their forms out? So I believe Gail Borden talked about doing like a flash mob where everybody comes and fills out their census form. Or can you make programs where there's a set aside time for people to sit down at a computer and have help with their census form? So we're going to take a little bit of time. This is the worksheet that Dan mentioned earlier to try to put these two pieces together. So we've got our audiences across the top, and these are some examples of audiences. Like I said, you're going to need to go back and dig through your own maps and identify who these groups are for your area. And then along the left are these 4 steps. And Ashley, I think you were going to share the link to this as a Google Doc. So that you can each make your own copy of that and adjust it for yourself. And then for those of you who don't have Google Docs, I think we've got another link to a Microsoft Excel version of the same thing, and just use them to whatever extent it is that you find this useful. But it's just an attempt to give some structure to brainstorming about how we're going to employ programming as a tool to get people to fill out their census forms. So I would like to start off our discussion, our group discussion here today, by sort of like hive mind approach to some ideas for each of these boxes. So what you're going to do is pick an audience and pick a marketing communications goal and sort of follow to that box and start spitting out some ideas. So what is a program that might achieve that marketing goal for that audience? So I'll get us started. So if I were picking the audience families with young children, and I was picking awareness as a goal, what library programs might be able to address that? Well, it occurs to me that we have a captive audience of families with young children at every story time. So we could plan a story time about counting, or we could plan a story time about everyone being included. And then after giving that message to the kids, we can talk to their parents who are there in the room and say, and did you know that coming up soon in the United States, we're going to count every person in the United States? Isn't that so exciting? And mom and dad, here's some information about the census, and that's what that is. And now that particular population has an awareness that the census is coming and that they need to participate. So I'm going to be quiet now and let everybody who's participating here jump in with some ideas of programs that you think might be able to fulfill some of these needs. So go.
Thanks, Catherine. I just want to mention to folks, you should be able to find the chat box. I think it's on your bottom toolbar, and it should have a number flashing if you haven't opened it yet. There should be chats waiting for you. But feel free to enter that directly into the chat box. Let us know, how are you, what audiences are you looking at, and what are fulfilling those needs.
I've got one, Catherine. So let's go like foreign born or the non-English speaking. I know that here at the Vernon Area Library, we have a very active ELL community where we are helping people learn English multiple times a week. So we've partnered with our staff member here to make one of the topics of the conversation circles that he has be the census. So he's going to go over some of those basic things that we mentioned before, like the history, but all for people that are at the library using the library to learn English.
That's great. I'm sorry if you all had to listen to me typing there. So I'm trying to get it into the chat for the folks who are going to just read the chat instead of listening to the whole thing. Anyone have any other ideas?
We should probably give people a little bit to type because I know from my own experience I'm a slow typer, so it could be we'll probably see a couple more roll in here.
I see that Julie said that they're planning a heritage festival this spring and that they can have a table there with information on the census. That is a great use of your time and a place. And if you haven't already started a complete count committee in your community, that is a great program for your community members. If this festival is something that's community wide, you can get all other organizations to even host these tables because libraries know there's always a fair to attend, and sometimes it's an issue of staffing. So if you can get other volunteers that are equally as excited about the topic to kind of post up at a spot somewhere over the next year, lean on your community, your census community. Ooh, a TED Talk.
Yeah, Tina's provided a bunch of great ideas. I really like, she says that they're targeting the ESL, ELL classes and their children to get more families counted, which is a fantastic idea. And the TED Talk, man, I want to learn more about that.
Yeah, one way you can approach this is to take if you do have existing programs, like could you make census somehow be the theme of that program? So if you have a book group that meets on a regular basis, could you select a nonfiction book that has to do with some tangentially related topic and then talk about the census in there? So like inclusion is a really good one because the census is the ultimate demonstration of making sure every last person is included. The census does count every human being in the United States. So you could work it into a discussion that way. The story time one, I think, is a good one to launch. ELL is another thing you can pull into there. For frequent or new residents, if you have some sort of library tour that you give new residents, perhaps it's something you mentioned during that. Just if you take a look at your existing calendar, see if you can apply the theme of the census or something related to the census to any of that. And because I don't think I can overstate this enough. You can't really overdo raising awareness about the census. There's really huge implications to the count being less than it should be. So please take every opportunity. And today we're just talking about programming. The information table is another example of there's some overlap with just general communications. And so definitely the same chart that we're looking at for deploying programming in these themes, you could take a look at all of your communications vehicles as well and figure out how can you build awareness, understanding, belief, and action through your communications vehicles for these things. So the same framework is going to apply to a bunch of different areas. Today we just thought we'd get started with programming because that calendar is ticking along. So
I know that a lot of libraries have like Wi-Fi hotspots. So I've heard of people going out into the community with these Wi-Fi hotspots and trying to get people to fill out the forms right there on the site in the place that they are. So it may be a little bit more outreach than programming, but using all of the tools that you already have at the library to kind of work towards this goal and finding the people where they are. I was thinking about probably those with limited internet or even those that are perhaps, I guess all of these would count for that. So
I just want to mention a couple things. So first, folks, if you're typing into the chat box, one of the things you can do so that other attendees can see your chats is that you can actually click. If you see the to field and then it says all panelists, you can click and actually drop it down to all panelists and attendees so that other attendees can see your chats. And we've had some really good ones. I just want to mention. Brian says we're going to loosen up rules for using our computers to make filling out the census easier. That's great. Thank you. Kathy says we are planning an ice cream social. Oh man, talk about understanding and belief right there. For adults in our small town, plan to have several questions about needs for the community and think that adding a census information will be part of that. We'll have census link on all patron computers also.
That's great. Yeah, I did, let's see. Wonderful. Amy, as far as nursing homes, you might want to check if there is an office in your community or if you need a contact at the census. I'm happy to share that with you. But nursing homes and senior centers, I believe, fall under group quarters, and they have a different process for counting those people. If you're already programming to them, obviously I don't see any harm, but I think that they might actually not have to do it. I think that the organization where they're living does it for them, just because there are some challenges there. So.
I just want to address real quick that one of the hard to count populations are folks who don't trust the government. And you may have heard that there was quite a bit of kerfuffle about whether or not we were going to include a citizenship question on the census. At this point, the answer is no, it will not be included, but definitely there was a lot of public relations that happened around that issue that's going to discourage a population to not respond because they fear of that information being used against them. And just today I ran across an article and it surprised me. It makes sense to me that the Hispanic population might be a little bit less trusting of how this information will be used. And actually outpacing Hispanics in this area is our Asian American community. And I'm going to need to do some more research with that, but they actually have a higher percentage of folks reporting that they're not likely to fill out their census. So just something to think about. I would say that key to reaching those people is going to be gaining their trust. So if you can bring in a speaker that's a trusted figure for that community to talk about this topic and talk about how it is the law that census information can only be used and exposed to the census and nothing else, that might be a way to engender some belief and some confidence in their ability to safely fill out their forms.
Catherine and Ashley, I just want to acknowledge a question that came in. It's from Tina. Does the census give you a been counted certificate or end screen, so to speak? If so, offering a prize to anyone who brings that might encourage participation. Do you know the answer to that question?
I don't. Ashley, do you know?
I don't think anybody knows anything yet. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what, we don't really know. I do know that you are right that it is a screen, so they're going to try to have at least, it's 80% people are going to be asked to fill it out online. But I do know, I know that when we did our last Rails session a couple weeks ago, a week ago, I don't even know what day it is, but they talked about how you're going to get a postcard in the mail. And one of the presenters said that they're going to need the postcard to fill it out, but I did get confirmation from the census that they won't need the code on the postcard. All they need is their physical address and the cross streets. So that's really great as far as getting people to fill it out on the spot where they are, where you are. So that's good news, but that's really all I got out of them as far as what it looks like or what it's going to take for people to fill it out. So
I love the idea of sort of gamifying the census response, though. Like we can again, reach into our toolbox. What do we do to get people to participate in summer reading? And one of the things we sometimes do is, pit the schools against one another. Is this elementary school or that elementary school have a higher percentage participation rate? We could do something like that to encourage a little bit of gaming of the system, or a prize at the end definitely is, never hurts.
I do remember in one of our many conversations with people, Catherine, that Denise Rowley from the Gale Board and Library said that the days of the census in 2020, in 2010, they were able to track the rate of response down in live time down to the census tract, so they could say and see that a certain census tract wasn't doing as well as it should be or could be doing in real time. And so they would kind of pinpoint efforts and send people from their complete count commission to these places and boots on the ground, get people to fill them out in the places that they were that day. Kind of wild. It's like a chase.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to change the slide here. So we're already sort of in this portion of our online roundtable today, but I actually want to give everybody who's in the audience here a chance to ask questions of the two of you. So you don't need to, if you want to put your questions straight into the chat box, that's great. You don't need to do the Q1, Q2 thing, but we will eventually have some prompt questions that Ashley and Catherine have created so that we can all kind of discuss them. But in the meantime, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box again. This is a point of time where we can all talk about the things that we're doing in our library, the things that we are interested in doing in our libraries. This is, as I mentioned, or as I told Ashley and Catherine, this is kind of a sandbox for you all to figure out what you want to do. Now's the time to kind of start putting those plans in place, and we want to give you the tools to do that. So if you do want to participate, that's great. Feel free to type that in, and we'll. Ashley and Catherine, do you mind staying on audio just to kind of talk through some of this stuff?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Okay, so I don't see any questions as of yet, so maybe I'm just going to jump into our first question, and the two of you can sort of take it. Okay, so I don't want to be duplicating things that other organizations in my area are already doing. How do I know what my municipality or elected officials are planning?
I would say ask. If you aren't already working with them, you should be working with them. If they are planning things and have plans, you can identify through the census website. Oh, I don't have it right here, but there is a link to a map that identifies complete count committees all over the country, and you can see if your community already has one of these groups established. And the census documentation has libraries listed as, a component of a healthy complete count committee. So there is room for you at the table, and your ideas and your thoughts do count on that. So if, do you have anything else to add to that, Catherine?
Yeah, so the library doesn't need to go this alone by any means. It would actually be very beneficial to your whole community to have as many resources from your community participating as possible. So formally, those are called complete count committees or complete count commissions, but if your area doesn't have one, that doesn't mean you can't sort of form a working group. And that would be looping in the schools, the municipalities, and then any sort of business resources in your area that might have something to lend to the effort, because turning out a complete and correct count is of huge importance to everyone. And so it's sort of all hands on deck. So at the very least, I would encourage you to reach out into the network that you already have at your library. Denise Rowley talked about this at the Rails meeting. If you've got a foundation or a friends group, talk to them and see what they can bring to the party to get everybody to participate. And so, but make sure you are leveraging if there's a community fair happening, like I know National Night Out will be happening in August. Like, could you have a booth at that? Could you, over the winter, there's not a lot of these things, but in the spring, then they'll start turning out. Could you have a farmer's market booth? Could you, whatever these things are, what is your community already doing that you could latch onto, either you as an informational source or somebody else, just make sure somebody's doing it.
I wanted to add one other thing to that. We aren't, I mean, just inside baseball, I don't think our community has an official complete count group, but the library will be working with our partners at senior facilities just to kind of get out the word. Contacts that we have with businesses, small businesses in the Chamber of Commerce, we keep a really great list of local places that have bulletin boards that allow us to post things that we keep updated for big events that we have, year round. So we're going to actually put posters up at these places using an infrastructure that we already have from events that we've been doing for years. And yeah, just kind of plugging into the places that we already are. So I mentioned our English language learner groups, our storytime groups, and just kind of niche populations that you're already serving, just kind of find a way to include them in it.
We have a little bit of a shy group here, but if you all have answers for that question, what are you doing to find out what municipal and elected officials are doing in your local region? Let us know, because I think it's beneficial. Every community is different. That's one thing that we find out a lot here at Rails, and so you might be doing things differently, and maybe that would help someone else. So if you do have that, please again type it in the chat box. So I'm gonna put in the second question. And this is probably one of the trickiest ones. I like this question a lot. There we go. Q2. What about the people who don't come to library programming?
Well, it is sort of the big kahuna, right? We're always looking to reach our non-users. I would start with programming's not the only tool in the toolbox. So we want to use every tool we have to talk about the census and encourage people to fill out their forms, but it's not the only thing we've got. So I would encourage you to, just like you're looking at how can you make your library programming work for this purpose, what other communications vehicles do you use or do you know about in your community that you can use to get the word out? So you can put an article in your newsletter, and even if they never come to a program, they may read this article in your newsletter. Or you can put signs up in the library, you can put signs up outside, or you can ask the municipality that you are part of to put it on their bulletin board. So your communications channels are another tool you can leverage to this cause. And then beyond that, just like we are always looking to reach non-users by going out into our community and being at community events and showing up in the park or at the train station or at the fitness center, you can do those same sorts of pop-up outreach events on this topic.
Kathy had a great suggestion. We will use our newsletter, which goes to every household in the district.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
Yes, please.
Okay, so John has a question. John says, are there any media kits or other resources we can access to find posters, images, graphics, etc., to help us amplify our message either in the library or in our newsletters or on our websites/social media?
Absolutely. I'm actually finding that as we work through this, that the problem with 2020 census information is not that there's not enough of it, it's that there's way too much of it, and it's sort of hard to figure out which thread to follow. So I would point out the two that I think are the most valuable to me, and one of those is the census.gov website itself. I am a fan of their community outreach toolkit, and if you Google that, I'm sure you can just find it. It's a quick start guide for tailoring your outreach efforts to the people that you serve, and it really has some very nice sort of checklists for you. And then the other is the American Library Association published the Library's Guide to the 2020 Census, and it is tremendous. It's really nicely digested. And then I believe in conjunction with that, they have folders full of exactly those things. So social media, graphics, and new example press releases and things like that that you can use as templates.
I also, let's see here. There was a comment from Tina. So she says, we have a prominent digital sign plus a billboard that posts our ads. Both will be used for promotion. That's great. Thank you, Tina.
That's great. Go, Tina.
All right. Keep those questions coming. In the meantime, I'm going to attempt to type in the Rails census page, and I might get it wrong because I can't navigate to the website to check it out. But if you click on that, it sends you a 404 notice. Come back to me and let me know. Okay, so so we're still, if you still want to answer that question about question 2, what about the people who don't come to library programming? Type in an answer. Let us know what you're doing to reach those people who don't come to library programming. In the meantime, I'm going to enter the third question. We got about 15 minutes left. Does programming need to do all of this? Could we just put an article or an ad in our newsletter with this information? That's a great question.
Does it need to do all of this? Sounds really heavy. It helps, but obviously it's kind of a delicious stew. If you've got them all together, it works itself out nicely. Programming doesn't need to be the only thing that libraries do. It almost shouldn't be, right? I think in addition to putting an article in an ad with a sprinkling of programming, then you have a very holistic example or showing of why the census is important. You kind of just want to, I don't want to say inundate people, but everywhere that people look, they want to be reminded of how important this is. So if this helps, then I think it's doing its job.
We've got some really good responses. I think this was to question 2 about, does programming have to be the, what about people who don't come to library programming?
Mm-hmm.
Tina says many community chamber of commerce have email blasts, plus village newsletters, and in Plainfield, water bills, and all that can have info in there. Yes, those water bills. I've heard of some communities have good relationships with their with the organizations that do the water bills. So that's really nice to have. Kathy says make some small bookmarks with a reminder to fill out census forms. Give one a check out. Not sure when that would be a good time to start. Too early, or people will forget. We will wait till postcards to start to come out, I think. Well, what's your opinion on that? When is there a too early?
So I believe the federal campaign is going to start really cranking up in January, post-winter holidays. You'll be able to get more attention than before. I know the postcards will be coming out like end of February, beginning of March. And self-response. This is the first time the census is being done online. This is a whole new ballgame. Those postcards will start arriving on or about March 12th. So if you kind of want to pace your resources, that's going to be when people are going to start to see this show up in their mailbox. They're going to have already heard about it a little bit from other sources. So that would be a good time to really crank up the volume on your communications. Census Day itself is April 1st, but it doesn't mean you have to answer your form on April 1st or you're too late. They will continue taking self-response, I believe, into July. But beginning in May, then if you haven't responded online, that's when you're going to start to have the door knockers and the additional mailings, and it's going to be kind of hard to overlook. So.
We have those, Catherine, here we have the printer at the bottom of the receipt paper. If we don't we have that?
Yep.
I feel like I've seen that before. I hadn't thought of that. That's a good one.
I want to also put a plug out there for if you have an answer to that question 3, does programming need to do all of this? Couldn't we just put an article, something in a newsletter? Feel free to answer that in the chat box. Again, we've got about 10 minutes left, so we still got time for some questions. I'm going to put the last one in there. Question 4, awareness is pretty straightforward, but how do I get people to believe? That's a great question.
So that's why there are marketing professionals, and it's not just a thing you do on the back of the napkin. That it is tricky, but if you can think of, everybody's familiar with the things that are used in the retail world to sell you stuff. And the reason those techniques are used are because they're effective. So how could you treat this like a product that you're trying to sell somebody? So I think I've mentioned earlier on that one of the biggest influencers is what they call social proof. If you see that all your neighbors are putting their recycling on the curb, you are way more likely to put your recycling on the curb. So anything you can do to demonstrate that everybody's filling out their census form is going to help people feel like they too should fill out their census form. So like the I voted sticker, bring your completed census card to the desk to get something that you can wear on your chest or stick in your yard, or I think that's a really fun way of doing that. Showing the percentage response rate for your community in general. And I believe that's something that you can get on that Rome map, that Census Rome map. I believe there's a real, as this count comes in, you're gonna have real-time results of what percentage. So you could have a map showing in your library of what areas are responding at what rates. It's gonna make people feel like they should respond to.
That's kind of cool.
Another way that people sell you things is with influencers, right? So there's a reason that Instagram influencer is a legit profession for 2019. It's because it works. So if you can find folks who are esteemed in your community to talk about this at a program, or use their photo in a sign, or have them be a spokesperson, that's going to help people feel like they should be participating. I like that gamification idea that came up earlier. Those kinds of sales techniques. Just think about what sells you something. How can you employ that same technique to make people believe that the census is something that they should do, feel it emotionally.
All right, I'm going to put out a last call here for questions or comments. I'm hoping that any of you have a last, kind of issue or idea that you want to suggest. That'd be really helpful. I also want to say that I like that. I like this idea of influencers and social proof. That resonates very true. And I really like that approach and that kind of just mindset, because I think libraries in general could really put that to use. So Tina has a comment. If you have a button maker, you can create "I've been counted" buttons. That's a great idea.
That's awesome.
I feel like half of my job is trying to come up with something to do with those dang button makers. There we go. No problem can't be solved with the button maker.
So, Catherine and Ashley, before as we wait for people to type in final comments or suggestions, are there any final thoughts that you have, or things that that we didn't discuss here today about programming for the 2020 census that you wanna put out there?
Well, I think a question that a lot of us may have is, well, why on earth is this the library's job to get this done? Isn't this the census's job to get this done? And the reason Ashley and I are pursuing this is not because we are subject matter experts. We're sort of learning as we go and just trying to share what we learn. But it's because we realize that, if not us, who? We're not seeing a lot of other organizations in our area step up and take the lead here. And it's so important that this that the count is complete and correct. And if you don't know what's riding on it, I would encourage you to go watch that Rails recording. In short, it's going to determine political representation and federal funding for your community for the next 10 years or more. And if power and money isn't enough to get you motivated to do this for your community, I'm not sure what would be. Libraries are uniquely positioned to be a leader in this area because we are a trusted government organization, and there's not a heck of a lot of those anymore. So I really encourage you to take this to heart, that if this doesn't go well in your area, it's going to affect you enormously for a very long time. So pitch in.
And just to kind of double up on something that we started with, is that it's not too late. I know that when Catherine and I first kind of got like pumped and charged about this whole initiative and the census at all, we were like, we're late, we're behind, this isn't going to work out for us because we haven't been planning for a year and a half. But it's okay. It's okay, and anything is better than nothing. And if you are in charge of programming, or if you have relationships with schools or any organizations in your community, it's the perfect time to really show your value and to show your commitment to your community by engaging the idea of the census, and kind of, I don't want to say preaching, but definitely standing up and saying how important it is. So don't be afraid.
Okay, thank you both. Very well said. I really like that idea, this idea that we're all trusted voices in our community, and no one knows the community better than you all do in your own communities. So please go out there and start thinking about this, start planning these things, because they are really important. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to bring our forum to a close today. I really want to thank our presenters today, Catherine and Ashley, who did a fantastic job talking about their ideas, talking about their resources, and also coming up with some great suggestions for you all. It's fantastic that we are able to tap into some of this stuff. So in the meantime, please do check out our Census 2020 page, and from that page you should be able to sign up for our next Rails online roundtable, which takes place Thursday, August 15th, and that will be on Census 2020 resources and services. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye.